Okay.
Oh no.
Let's get back into it.
Do a reality show.
No.
Totally, you should.
Yeah, we'll talk about that actually
Yeah.
once. We'll talk about
Okay.
that.
I would so watch it.
So, we have a gist of what this is. Inference versus descriptive. Inference is when you're trying to discover something about a population by asking a small subset. Now, I'm going to skip the coffee one because I don't really like it. We're going to go straight to the gallon. Okay, we're going to go straight to the gallon. Actually, we're going to, let's use the coffee one. Here's a headline where most Americans will stop reading. Study claims caffeine addicts get no jolt from morning coffee. How many caffeine addicts we got in this room? How do you know you're a caffeine addict?
I had 4 shots of espresso this morning.
Oh my gosh.
No,
Does that mean you're addicted to it?
Yeah.
Or you just like espresso?
no, I just like
I'm
it.
being a total jerk here. I'm just trying to prove a point. You just like it.
Because when school's not going, I hardly drink.
Oh, interesting. So it's a correlate. Not so much. You're a conditional caffeine addict, maybe.
Pavlov.
Conditional, right? If it's in school, I have to have coffee. Anybody else like that? Maybe. I'm conditional. I had a kid, and now I need coffee. Never drank caffeinated beverages before.
But did your dad
So
drink
October
coffee?
18th, 2007, one day after my son was born.
That's when I started too.
Right? Conditional caffeine addict. The trick is, how do you define, it's back to the definition, Aaron. How do you define a caffeine addict? What makes a caffeine addict? Okay, so what makes a caffeine addict? A caffeine addict has to be well defined to put it in a study. Here's how they did. Go Jeff, go ahead.
Well, usually you get a headache if you don't have any caffeine
And-
by a certain
Or is that
time of
sugar?
the day.
What's a headache?
Withdrawal.
What's withdrawal?
It's a blood sugar drop. Yeah. Addiction.
Okay, it's a blood sugar drop. I can measure that, right? I can objectively measure a blood sugar drop. I can't objectively measure a headache. Oh, I have a headache. Wait a minute.
Well, what kind of headache?
Or define a headache.
Because you can have a hangover and people have headache, and that's too much ethanol.
I'm saying you have to define all this stuff, right? Here's how they define a caffeine addict. They studied adults who gave up caffeine for 16 hours. So in other words, they were regular users of caffeine. They defined regular in the study. If you're interested, you can click on the link and get to it. And they forced them to not have it for 16 hours.
Imagine being with
Okay?
that.
So I'm not saying that's a good definition. I'm saying that's what they used as a definition. This is where inferential stat can get in your way. We got any mountain bikers in here, or road bikers? Road bikers, mountain bikers, yeah. So do you remember back in the early to mid 1990s, there was this rage of new seats made for mountain bikes and road bikes with a cut in the middle, because guys were getting impotent from riding bikes.
Right.
They saw all the saddles you see nowadays have a little cutout in the middle to increase blood flow, or to allow for more blood flow. The study that was done on was based on a study of professional cyclists who spend about 12,000 miles a year in the saddle. Now, I ride a lot, but I get roughly half of that in. My friends that I ride with who don't bike commute, they do maybe 10 miles a week. And they're like, dude, I'm not gonna be able to get this new saddle. They spent 230 bucks on a saddle that probably they didn't even need, because they weren't riding, and they're mountain biking, which means they're standing and sitting and standing and sitting, thereby increasing blood flow. Road bikers sitting for 12,000 miles was the problem. You see what I'm getting at here? The population that was studied in the study was elite professional road bike males. My friends took that as bikers. There's a big difference there, isn't there? There's a big difference. I'm not saying I'm not saying those new saddles aren't comfortable, because they are wicked comfortable. I'm saying that the worry of impotence was tied to the wrong population. So you have to ask what your population is that you're studying. That's why I said, what's a caffeine addict? Define a caffeine addict before you start telling me about them, yes? Fair? So the population is caffeine addicts, whatever that is. What's the sample? I circled it for you. 379 adults. Now I'm assuming caffeine addicts, 379 caffeine addict adults. That's totally fine. That's the caffeine addicts, and we're good with that. I can totally live with that. But that's the sample. From that, they most likely took measurements like blood sugar drops, maybe heart rate changes. I don't know how they measured it. Again, you can click on the Reuters link and get that information. But the idea is that whatever statistic they analyzed, a statistic is the measure of the sample. The way I remember this is statistic starts with S, so does sample. That helps me remember it. You're trying to discover something about the population, which starts with P, and statisticians call those parameters, those measures parameters. So, just so you know, parameters versus statistics. Parameters, what you want to know about, but you can never know directly. You get a sample. Now, because it's only a sample, there's some uncertainty in it. You don't have the entire count. So then you have to apply what's called a margin of error. I saw a hand go up somewhere. I'm sorry. Maybe I did. Maybe I did.
It was me.
It was you, Katie. Go ahead.
Is the and probably get off topic. Is the 16 hours the dependent variable?
It's the definition, right? It's the experimental design or the
Right.
definition,
Okay.
and we'll get into that in 244 and also beyond if you take research methods. All you have to worry about is whenever somebody tells you something very generally, like coffee's bad for you, coffee's good for you, go ask them what study did you read and what did they measure. Because what it ends up being is coffee isn't bad for you. It's that people with type 2 diabetes who have coffee laced with sugar spike their insulin levels. Coffee's bad for you. Overgeneralization, right? Those studies are usually very, very, very specific. We'll talk more about this as we go through this course. But when you try to make it overly general, you know, Obamacare sucks. Okay, how? Give me metrics, right? Give me a metric. Oh, Tea Partiers are so blockheaded. Give me metrics. How did you metric that? How did you measure that? Don't just give me a catchphrase. I want to have data to back it up. Here's case in point. Case in point, okay? This is a slightly old Gallup poll. You have a new one on the quiz coming next week. A month old versus 3 years old. U.S. oil drilling gains favor with Americans. That's a very, very catchy headline. Very, very catchy headline. Support for offshore drilling and oil exploration in Alaska reached new highs. 2 claims. Offshore drilling is now supported more, and so is offshore drilling in a particular place and more, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. These are fairly old claims. The reason I like this one so much, it was done on March 14th, 2011, almost a year to the day that what happened. Do you remember this? The oil explosion, the Deepwater Horizon explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. BP, 86 days of oil leaching in. Americans' support for offshore drilling went through the basement after that because when you see a Pelican covered in oil, you don't want to drive your car either, right?
Yeah.
This is a year later. We have very short-term memories as Americans, right? So, here's a study. Princeton, New Jersey, home of Gallup. 6 in 10 Americans favor increasing offshore drilling for oil. That's their conclusion. How'd they get that conclusion? Well, they asked the question. Do you favor or oppose increasing offshore drilling for oil and gas in U.S. coastal areas? Okay. 60% said yes, 37% said no, 3% withheld their opinion. Do I believe that 6 in 10 Americans support offshore drilling?
No.
I don't. Give me one reason why I don't believe. That's exactly, and I'm talking about exactly 6 in 10. Katie, go.
Where did the sample come from?
Look to the bottom of the screen. If you can see it, I copied and pasted for you. In the quiz, I teach you how to find this on Gallup's website. It's usually in the bottom in 8-point font.
Television interviews.
Results are based on telephone interviews conducted March 3rd through 6th, 2011 with random sample of 1,021 adults. Don't worry about that. That's plenty, believe it or not.
Because it only need 35, right, to get a good...
It depends on what you're studying. Proportions or averages, that's 244. Very good question. Very good question. 1,021 adults. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the telephone bit. That's pretty much anybody uses anymore is telephone. It's the worst. It's the best of the worst methods. It's the best of the worst way to get data for Gallup. Aged 18 plus, so voting age Americans, living in the continental U.S. That makes me a little bit nervous.
Random.
They didn't ask Alaskans, who have pretty much all coast, or Hawaii, which is all coast. 2 of the most coastal states weren't included in this. So I'm a little nervous when they say Americans. If they said contiguous 48 or contiguous Americans, I'd be like, okay, I believe it a little bit more then. But I still don't believe the fact that 6 in 10 Americans, 60% is 6 in 10, yes?
Yeah.
But 60% of what said they supported? 60% of
Some Americans.
which ones? Which ones?
The continental,
And which ones in particular, Tony?
Canada,
Kevin, which ones in particular?
in particular.
Who did they ask?
Adults.
Which ones?
Voting age.
How many?
Only
1,021.
Boom! They only asked 1,021 Americans. 60% of those 1,021 said they support offshore drilling. If we asked every single American, which we already can't do, Tom, right? We can't do it. But if we did, John, would it come back to exactly 60%? Would it come in close, do you think?
No.
It could. We don't know. There's some uncertainty there, right? We know it probably won't be exactly the same number. So how do you adjust for the uncertainty? David.
And plus, how many of those 1,021 people do you actually think have a workable knowledge on offshore drilling?
Benefit of the doubt here, friend. Friend, benefit of the doubt here. Let's assume that everything else was consistent except for their answer yes, no, or no opinion.
Sure is yes.
Let's just say, let's give them benefit of the doubt, except for the results of the answer, it's consistent. I know that's a stretch, but that's what 244 is partially about too. What do you have to do to the 60% to adjust for the uncertainty? Somebody say it nice and loud. Linda, you have to apply a margin of error. What's the margin of error? Look at the bottom, it's even further down. For results based on the total sample of it, blah, 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 blah. 95% confidence, don't worry about that yet, that's in 244. Margin of error is plus or minus 4 percentage points. So this really isn't 60. You can't say it's exactly 60. You say, I'm fairly confident that it's at least 56, which is 4 points down, to at most 64, which is 4 points up. You don't come out with one number. You say, I think it's between these two numbers. That way you cover more area on the number line, therefore you increase the chance you're right. Is that fair enough? So they shouldn't have said 60%, they should have said between 56 and 64%. Now, even if they do that, I still think that more favor than opposed, don't I? Because even if you do that to the 37, 37 with 4 points added to it is 41. That's still not higher than the lowest point of the interval over here, is it? 56 is still bigger than 41. So I still think that more Americans are in favor of offshore drilling, even when you put the margin of error on there. So I like the claim in spirit. I just don't like it's the way it's presented. They call it Americans, it's not all Americans. And they said it's exactly 60%. It's not exactly 60%. Those are my two gripes with it. And I got a bigger gripe with the second one. And here, is that okay with that first clause? So, John, go.
Where'd you get the plus or minus 4?
I didn't, they did.